All right, guys, here we go. You're in for a treat. We have three generations here. We have Cecily Mack, Diego Perez, and Jack Kornfield. Cecily is the COO of Block Daemon, a crypto infrastructure company. She serves as chair of the board for Search Inside Yourself Institute and is a co-founding partner of Wisdom Ventures. Diego Perez is a New York Times bestselling author and influencer on Instagram with over 2 million followers through his pen name, Young Pueblo. His two books include Inward and Clarity and Connection, and he has a brand new book coming out. It's on pre-order right now. Please check it out. It's called Lighter. Jack Kornfield, well, we all love and know Jack. Jack is back. Woo, Jack. He is the co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts and the Spirit Rock Center in California. He said to keep it short. I said, okay. So, author, teacher, he's a mentor to leaders across the world. The three of them will be discussing generational Dharma, timeless wisdom in modern life, and Cecily will be our moderator. Please welcome these three. Come on to the stage.
Thank you.
Wow. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Jack. Welcome.
Thank you, Cecily.
Thank you.
It is incredible to have you both here. And I just want to start with a minute to just let it sink in. I know you both have traveled far. We're all emerging in our own way after a couple years of a whole bunch of different things for all of us. And it's just very powerful to have you here and everyone. Thank you so much. What a privilege. I know when we were preparing, Jack, you had some questions that you thought might be good to just familiarize ourselves a bit with who's in the room today.
Yeah, it feels really important. First of all, I'm really happy to be here. I've been in Wisdom 2.0 since its genesis. And it feels really important to connect somehow and not just get on stage and be Dancing Bear or whatever, we're hired. Especially Dancing Bear is Russian, so but we'll leave that aside. We'll get to that. So I have some questions for you. How many of you are technologists, where that's your main work? Okay, I'm a minority. How many of you are therapists, counselors, teachers in the helping professions? You're helping those technologists. Okay, that's great. How many of you are scientists? Wonderful. How many lawyers? Yay, there's a handful. Parents? Oh yeah, about half the group. How many of you meditate in a regular way? Wow, that's fantastic. Many, many. All right, how many of you are concerned about the growing polarization in the society, in the world? Pretty much every hand. How many of you are concerned about climate change? I want you to feel this too. It's not just that you raise your hand, but that we're actually in this together and in this conversation together. How many of you hope that technology will help solve these problems? And how many of you are concerned that technology could also be misused and make things worse? So look at that too. These are part of the reasons actually that we're here, to have this kind of a conversation and the time we're in. So yeah. I appreciate it because there's a way of feeling, okay, now I know who we are in this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that. So we have some big topics we're going to get to today. I wish we had hours, but we'll make the most use of the time we do have. I wanted to start with something a bit personal. So we are all really effectively emerging on theme with this day from a couple of years of, for many of us, isolation, changes in the way that we work and live, relate to family and beyond. And Jack, I'd love to start with you just kind of in this moment, in this time. I know you haven't actually even been in a room like this since COVID began, so it's a huge honor and privilege that you've joined us today. How has this emergence been for you and your work and your being?
I'm actually taking it very slow partly because I'm about to turn 77, and I haven't had COVID yet. I'm sure I'm going to get it. But I'm putting it off a little bit and see.
Please do.
Yeah. It's fantastic to see people in person. I mean, we've been longing for that. Look, Zoom has been a lifesaver, and it's been shocking to see how good it is in creating retreats and creating connection. And it's still a really limited channel, that screen. And there are things that we get nurtured by and need from one another. And so I'm just kind of coming out and going, I want to be cautious, but this is who we are. Yeah. We really have to hold hands together.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Diego, how about you?
Similar to Jack, this is my first time at a live event since February, since the last Wisdom 2.0.
Wow.
Yeah, that happened right at the cusp when the pandemic was reaching the United States. So it feels quite beautiful to see old friends, to meet new people. I was really fortunate to have a pretty tight affinity group, a group that I could spend time with in person, other fellow meditators, and then my wife's family and my family. So we had our unit, but it's nice to just be here together as a collective. Yeah, get to share space. Similar to Jack, just I haven't gotten COVID yet, so we'll see what happens. But it's nice to just like to live life together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a club I hope you guys don't have to join. Yeah, that's excellent. So when I think about the two of you and kind of the theme of this talk in general is about just generations and how you both have this very powerful presence, impact, voice. You're very different followings and very different modalities. You did both go on some type of a life journey or quest and have some experiences and bring back some knowledge and experience. Very different quests, but you did both have this feature of your paths. And you came back and you found ways to share your teachings, your learnings, your wisdom with these broad audiences. You both are very successful authors and inspire so many people around the world in different ways. And it's obvious to see maybe one is more in teachings and in books and in retreats. And Diego, you're leveraging technology really for healing. It's something John spoke about this morning. Like, technology can actually be used for healing. But I wonder, and maybe we wonder, are the teachings evolving also? Or is it just the way that we're delivering them that is kind of adapting to our times, digital or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's kind of all the above. I think the teachings are definitely evolving because that's the nature of when you receive a teaching, it enters your perception, it hits you with some truth, but then it also goes outward through your perception, so it's not going to be quite the same as what you got. And I think just for me personally, like I take meditation really seriously. I think that's when I conceive of my own identity, the first thing is I'm a meditator. That's what I take seriously. When I plan my year, the first thing I do is plan my time for retreats, and then everything else comes after. But I don't really, when I enter the digital space, what I want to do is sort of reflect in a way where I'm actively trying to reach people who've never seen a therapist yet, who've never meditated yet, people who are just starting to turn that lens inward and give them something to reflect on. And in that way, I've sort of taken the teachings and synthesized the way that they've affect my everyday life. And so I think they definitely are changing, but I think it's great to be able to leverage just the tech that we have and, enter a space like Instagram that can be so difficult on the mind, right? Just like making you more addicted, making you more lonely, affecting you in these ways that are not good for your mental health, but then try to flip the script and, bring forward simplicity so that it's much more easier for the mind to process, and just like encourage people to follow the things that help them be the best version of themselves, as opposed to just feeding their craving, which is a lot of what's happening on the internet. Yeah.
And a follow-up question to that: do you find that what you're offering through Instagram is just pouring out of you from your practice, or are you in an engagement with your followers? Are you learning from them what they're moved or inspired by?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely learning from them, but more so on the smaller scale. I think for the Instagram account itself, I try my best not to read comments, and for the sake of my own mental health, it's just like too much. And the DMs as well. But I take much more seriously, with my Substack and my newsletter that I'm putting out, which I put forward a lot longer, deeper writings, and I'll get emails back from people, and that is, there's this sort of touch of vulnerability and genuineness that you get from that person-to-person contact through email, whereas, on social media platforms, people can just kind of they just kind of say whatever, and a lot of times you just read rough things and you're like, I don't even know how to respond to that, so I'm just not going to. Yeah.
That's great. It's inspiring to us all. And Jack, so A Path with Heart, which is one of your most beloved books, and something that has been a resource for so many people, and just a kind of a cornerstone, I believe, of your work and offering as an author in addition to a teacher. This was 47 years ago you published it, and you're still such an active and generous teacher in the community, and I know you offer so much, and we'll talk a bit about what you're doing globally as well soon, but have your teachings evolved? Are you shifting with the times as well?
So first, I want to talk a little bit about the question of, do things evolve? And I loved your answer, Diego.
Yeah.
Of course they do. But I've been in these fancy teacher meetings with Buddhist teachers and wise people and shamans and stuff from around the world for a long, And one of the arguments that happens is you're watering it down, you're not keeping the original real teachings, the conservative ones, and then, but if you just conserve it, it's going to die out. We have to make it fresh. And I listen and I remember that, as the history tells it, that the week after the Buddha died, he said, you can abolish some of the minor rules and things, you can change things. But he made the mistake of not saying which things you could change. So all of a sudden there was an argument. Okay, well, he didn't say, so we should keep everything the same. And then these other people said, no, he told us we can change it. We need to. And they started fighting. And I'll sit in that room and I'll say, you are probably those same people born again to try and figure it out in this lifetime. But what's true is that the answer for things, we live in a very black and white culture, and the answer is yes. We need conservation, and we need depth, and that's really important. And one of the beautiful things that online teaching has begun to show us is that there are ways to do that. Yeah. But we also need, Buddhism was patriarchal, forget that S, whatever it is. We don't need that. Buddhism there are things that really do need to evolve and become more conscious, and both of those are important. One of the things that's a really big gift, and you sort of pointed to it, Cecily, is that I've actually been doing a lot online, and one of the questions that people ask more than anything around the world is, how do I get a teacher? Because almost everything online is one way. Yeah. Here's a meditation, here's some beautiful teachings, here's something you can do. And it goes to your very first question, we actually want relationship. Yeah. We want to be known and know. So I'm part of a new company called Cloud Sangha, and you can get a teacher who you meet with every week in a very small group for a year, and they get to know you and you know them and you work in your practice. And this, to me, is one of the blessings of what's possible, of how we can foster growth. And I've also got this other teacher training with Tara Brock, the mindfulness teacher training. We've got 5,000 people in 70 countries who've learned to be mindfulness teachers and compassion teachers. All around the world, this couldn't have happened 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And the pandemic has actually made it all the more so. So in some way, we're being invited to evolve and find new forms. And at the same time, we have to pause regularly and say, what's the deepest thing that we can teach and share and be with? How can we create a genuine space of attention and respect?
Yeah, beautiful, thank you.
I'm going to add one thing, sorry.
Please.
And that's because maybe we'll get to it, to global issues and things. Anybody who looks can see that no amount of technology, biotechnology, nanotechnology, space technology, AI, all that, is going to stop continuing warfare and racism and economic injustice and climate change, because those are all rooted in the human heart.
Yeah.
That's where they start. And so we now have to have the miracle of the technology matched by a transformation of the human heart. And that's the place that we sit in now as human beings.
So thank you for bringing that to our awareness. We are in this time where we have all these channels available to us. And Jack, I've heard you speak of this recently, this kind of duality of existence we live within. We can, be flipping across the TV channels or our social feeds and checking out the latest gossip from the Grammys, and then within seconds we're witnessing the horrors of what is happening around the world. And I know you work with audiences and people, communities, and companies, many of whom are represented in this room, but you also offer practice groups in Ukraine right now. And I'm wondering if you can help us together, whether it's individually or in community, reconcile this duality that's in us all. How do we endure, whether it's with our practice or other ways of living, this difficulty of such different human experiences that are in our day-to-day exposure?
So first, Cecily, I just want to take your question in both personally, but for all of us, because we're actually carrying this in our hearts if we get quiet and pay attention, and it's a really deep one. And you use the word endure in your question, which is interesting and in a way kind of compelling, because what we're talking about is the human condition. Plato said only the dead know the end of war. Let that sink in for a minute. And part of the problem with Ukraine, and we'll get back to that in a minute, is not just what's happening in Ukraine, but that it's pushed aside what's happening in Myanmar or in Ethiopia and in Tigray or Libya or the Darfur camps. I'll talk about that in a minute. But your question is, how can we hold this in the human heart while we also can go to Whole Foods and decide, do I want the French cheese or do I want the Italian cheese, and so forth, and we have our prosperity. And I don't have a simple answer, because there isn't one. I think to be a human being means we have to carry the unbearable beauty of the world, that in the 45 minutes we'll be talking, there will be a billion acts of kindness, of parents making scrambled eggs or boiled rice for their children, and people helping someone down the stairs or across the street, and there'll be acts of violence. So there's this unbearable beauty and the notion of tears. And I think what's important for us is to be able to get quiet enough to not turn our gaze away from what's difficult, because we can get lost, as Diego and you were talking about, we can sort of get into the consumer thing because it's too hard to bear. And one of the beautiful things about meditation is that you become the Buddha, or you become the wise one who sits under your tree of enlightenment, and you begin to trust that you have the great heart of compassion in you, that you can hold all this. And it doesn't help to be depressed. I mean, there's a beautiful book with Tutu and the Dalai Lama, the Book of Joy, and how when you've seen so much suffering in South Africa and Tibet, and Dalai Lama said, so much has been taken from me, taken the monasteries, burned our texts, imprisoned the monks and nuns. Why should I let them take my happiness? It's a miracle to be alive, to have life, to watch spring come back. And if you go to a refugee camp, they don't want you to be depressed. Okay, I feel so sorry for you. They're depressed enough, They actually want someone to come in and say, as I have in talking to people, whether it's Ukraine or elsewhere, there are thousands of generations of your ancestors that have lived through difficulty, and you know how to do this. It's in your bones, it's in your DNA. Not only will you survive, but here's the important part. This is the time for your moral leadership. This is the time when your values get tested and whether you can do this. Because I have friends, this famous nonviolent, wonderful person who called and said, I'm ready to sell what I have and buy missiles for the Ukrainians, right? And I said to her, after a life of nonviolence, I said, here's my problem, dear. I said that in those tanks are young Russian guys, young Russian kids. In those armored vehicles from Russia are also young people. And how can you want to kill any of them? So that's the place to start. And then, since I'm on a roll for a minute, forgive me, we have a collective responsibility, all right? The USA is a warlike nation. We've had one war after another, and I can't tell you, when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was this huge depression that swept over the Pentagon because we didn't have a good enemy to get all that money. You think I'm kidding? This is literal, and it's true. Now we've got a good enemy again. It's all we defunded the State Department. Benjamin Rush, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, wanted a defense or war department and a peacemaking department. Never been funded. We put $1 trillion into weapons. We sell them all around the world, and then we don't feel safe. There has to be So there has to be a different vision, and we who gather with this in the center of the technological world have to be willing to step back, because it's not about Ukraine or Russia, and there's lots of propaganda on both sides. Just be aware of this. I feel terrible for the people of Ukraine, nothing but that. But believe me, there is spin everywhere, from the oil companies to there's just lots going on, and it's easy to get swept away by the media, and it looks like a video game. Okay, who's right, and how do we win this one? In war, there is no one who wins. That's the truth of it. So when I talk to people in those circumstances, I really talk about stepping back. Yes, you need to find your moral center, because this is where you will be tested and where the new world will get born of something good. But at the same time, we also, as citizens, have to step back and say, what are we devoting ourselves to as a country and as a people? And this, then, can we use our technology to support in a beneficial way? Or do we do, the phrase that came was business as usual. And there's something literal about that, so.
Thank you.
I wanted to, a story popped up listening to Jack. My wife and I were talking the other day, and a friend of ours, someone really close to us, was saying that, they don't know if they want to have children because the world is so chaotic and it's in such a terrible time. And then I started thinking to myself, because one of my personal passions is history, was like, I asked my wife, I was like, when would be a good time? And I started just naming years, like 1968? It's like, no. I was like, 1930? No. 1890? I was like, no. 1840? Even worse. Like, you just keep going back, and there's always something horrific happening. There's something terrible. But human history is not just the history of suffering, it's also the history of victory, right? There are moments where we can be kind, but there's something quite special that's happening right now, which is that there is so much Dharma. There is so much opportunity for healing, and it's becoming more and more accessible. And not just in the United States, but throughout the world, it's becoming more and more accessible. And that's sort of, it feels auspicious. It feels like it's not an accident. Why is it that at a time when there are so many historic, critical challenges that are right in front of us, that humans have to overcome for us to create a better world, it's the same time when the most healing is available probably ever in history. And I think that's something that I always turn to, and it gives me a lot of hope, because as we heal ourselves as individuals and as groups and as collectives, we become much more creative, much more compassionate. Our minds literally work better. We can come up with new solutions. And we're seeing that more and more, and I think it just gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah,
You know?
beautiful.
Yeah.
You are really the embodiment of that, Diego, for a lot of us. So it's wonderful that you share your journey and how you've come to where you are and able to birth what you offer. One thing that came up in reflecting on today and just thinking about this was how I know you are so committed to your practice. You and your wife, Sarah, are just... I love this example you give about you set your year out based on when you're going to be on retreat. And I know that you just emerged yourself from a 45-day Vipassana retreat, I believe, which is beautiful in and of itself. One of the guests was asking earlier, how does somebody who doesn't have 45 days to go on a Vipassana retreat because of their life circumstances or tolerance or appetite or whatever it might be, how do we start small, or how do we use small snippets of practice? And this is really a question for both of you.
Yeah.
How do we adapt to what we can commit to and what we can do for our own healing in whatever type of role or life circumstances we find ourselves in?
I think that's something that it's really personal, right? We have to sort of take a good look at what our capacity level is, like not just in our life and the different responsibilities that we have, but we also have to take into account our own conditioning, our own trauma, and finding sort of that sweet spot where it's something that is challenging, but at the same time not overwhelming. You don't want to bring up so many things that then you run away from the inward process. You no longer want to reflect or get to know yourself because you are horrified by what's inside of you.
Yeah.
But you want to find that sweet spot so that you can continue taking sustainable steps inward and start doing that liberational work. And I think it's beautiful. I mean, Jack was just talking about Cloud Sangha. That sounds something that it sounds very accessible. And there's so many different entry points that are available into your own internal landscape now. And it's not just about being able to do a 45-day course or a 10-day meditation course. If you can, I highly advise that you go do it. But if you can't, totally reasonable, and you can still find different techniques and practices that can help you start developing your equanimity, start developing your sense of awareness, and developing your compassion. And that's what's important, is if you do what you can, then we're all better off, including yourself. So,
And Jack?
Yeah. Thank you, Diego. That's beautiful. And we are all better off. It's like Thich Nhat Hanh's expression where he said, when the crowded Vietnamese refugee boats met with storms or pirates, if everyone panicked, all would be lost. But if even one person on the boat remained steady and calm, it was enough. It showed the way for everyone to survive. And then you say, well, who is that person? And as Miss Piggy would say, moi. Turns out that you can be that person, you become that person. So here's a few things to add to what you said so beautifully, Diego. One is you can start small, as you said, and I'll give you an example of really small, because Meng, our dear friend who helped start Search Inside Yourself Leadership, did a teaching for people in Ukraine last week, just before I did. And there's so much trauma, and it's so hard for people to close your eyes and go into your body. It's just carrying so much. He taught micro meditations. 1 mindful breath. How is that? 3 mindful breaths. Or if you can't sit because you're carrying the grief or something difficult in your life, do walking meditation practice. There are very simple, steady and grounding things, and in a minute, the neuroscience, Richie was here, Richie Davidson, in even 60 seconds, you start to re-regulate your nervous system, and you also come to a place where you can see with greater clarity. So there's that. One is making it simple. The second is the incredible need for community. We're such an individualistic nation, and the idea that you're supposed to meditate on your own, yeah, if you can have sex on your own too, it's all right. But it's kind of better with other people for the most part, And we really need community, whether it is a meditation buddy who you set your alarm and sit with every day or 3 times a week, whether it's Cloud Sangha or some other thing where you join. We actually, and traditionally where it's taught, wherever 2 or more are gathered in his name, whether it's satsang or sangha or minyan, or we need to support each other. Because, and in our culture, our speedy consumer, look at your calendar culture, we need each other. And so that becomes something that you can somehow build into in a deep way to help you sustain your practice. And I forget the third thing, so just, you know.
We'll come back. One thing that you both have touched on, and it's inevitable given the theme of this conference and gathering and audience, is both the light and darkness of tech. The might and power, but also the potential for misuse. And I know we have a number of people here today and likely live streaming who are in these kind of cutting edge industries of virtual reality, or crypto, those crazy people, or AI. And there are more and more seemingly healing opportunities being offered with these technologies, while also other just pure addictive entertainment ones. What's your counsel to us as co-creators of this next generation of tech? A lot of us are calling it Web 3. What's your counsel to us on not straying into the dark side? How do we make sure that this is used for good? And where do you see the real potential within these spaces? Is it the big, huge tech companies, or is it fringe, or micro communities?
It's a huge, huge potential problem. I think it's one of the more sort of scarier problems that we have that is not talked about enough. I am a huge fan of Yuval Noah Harari. I love him so much. I think he's sort of like the Einstein of the social sciences. He's also a meditator in the same Vipassana tradition that I'm a part of, but he sort of is crusading around the world, constantly talking about the dangers of hacking the human mind and how easily through algorithms, through being able to take different like temperature readings, just all the data that we can gather from the human mind, how if that's placed in the wrong hands, in the hands of the wrong company, or in the hands of a dictator or some type of authoritarian regime, that you could potentially control human minds. And the awareness that he's building around that sort of super dark side of tech, I think it's just so critical so that we can learn essentially how to treat the mind gently. I think this is something that we, as the current generation that's alive here now, is that we need to make this a goal, is how can we treat the mind gently and support its freedom of perspective, so that we don't have algorithms basically tricking us into thinking that we're free and making decisions for ourselves, when in reality, it's just that the algorithm told you this same thing so many times, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, right, I think I like that, but no, you don't. Like you just saw that many, many times. So I think it's critically important, but to me, the same way that we as meditators should be walking through the earth very gently and trying to add harmony to any interaction that we're a part of, we need to bring that same type of energy into any products that we're creating, into the social circles that we're a part of, and in any companies that we're forming, because it could be a giant game changer. But the hacking of the human mind, I'm grateful that Yuval is doing that deep work to just let everyone know that this is starting to happen, and it could become much worse, and that we need to, literally do something big about this on the global scale, so that we don't end up accidentally enslaving ourselves.
So we have these huge forces that you're talking about, Diego, and they're also on different sides. There's AI. Will it be used for the good? Will it be misused? And AI is learning so fast, it's like a 2 or 3 year old now. In another couple of hours, it'll be going to college. I have to tell you, it's really extraordinary.
Yeah.
And then we have CRISPR and gene editing, where we can edit who people are. And that's going to be happening in nanosecond as well. We have fusion technology, which maybe in the next decade will supplant oil and solar and all of that. Quite possible. So there's all these beneficial things, but also the danger that you speak about, and the problems, climate, racism, divisiveness. How will we use them? I was invited to the first White House Buddhist leadership gathering on a president prior to the last one, just so you catch where it might have been, and was able to give the kind of one of the summary talks. And I read a text that goes way back to Buddhist teachings about wise society, that for a society to prosper and not decline, for people to live well, there were 4 principles. The first is that people come together in harmony and listen respectfully to each other and depart in harmony. First principle, that we actually listen. The second is that we care for the vulnerable among us, those who have power, take care of the whole in some way. A third principle was that we care for the environment. Pretty early on, these environmentalists and so forth. So I read these, but they're not different than what you'd see from the Iroquois nation and the indigenous wisdom, or from the Tao, or from, other great wisdom traditions. I said the beautiful thing is, and the important one is, that it's not just ideals, because we all love these ideas. There are practices that train the heart to do this. There are ways, starting in education, social or emotional learning, that's growing out of mindfulness and compassion, or institutions that we create, where you can actually train human beings to see with the heart of compassion, to respect oneself and another. These are, now neuroscience says it doesn't take that much, and we can build these in so that instead of the forces leading us to automatons and consumers, there's this other possibility, and we have it within us. Yeah. We have the inner technology that will allow us to do this, that in many ways is a match for the outer technology, and we somehow have to bring that forward. And then the last thing is, one of the people I know who's at the forefront of the AI development said, when is it going to be conscious, right? And when is it going to supplant human intelligence? And what about the competition between the US and China and developing and all of these kind of things? And I said, can you build in values along with information? Can you make the principles on which it's created, can you make a bodhisattva AI, whose first principle is not only do no harm, but bring benefit to living beings? Can you install that in there? And maybe the last, because that's what we need to do. We really need to think about what are the principles of our technology that we're building. And then the last thing is, this is not going to happen in the big companies, because I've worked in them a little bit too, whether it's Apple or Google or Microsoft or, Facebook or whatever. It happens at the margins. That's actually where creativity grows. It's from young people, it's from BIPOC people, or it's from, the margins, revolutionaries and musicians and, hackers in their basements and so forth, visionaries in that way. That's really where the answers are going to start to come if we're willing to support and listen in that way. That the changes, they want to come from the human heart. We have to quiet ourselves and listen, ask the real questions. What are the principles underlying our technology that we build in? And then invite the ones who aren't in the conversation, to be part of it.
Amazing, thank you. And hope that those creators themselves are in some form of healed too.
Yes.
Because our technology is only going to be the product of the builders, which is a lovely segue to something I'm very much looking forward to speaking with both of you about. One of my favorite topics, and you both raised it in your work, is the nature of relationships, personal, intimate relationships in your practice. And Diego, I know you write so generously on this topic, and so many around the world can just open one of your books or your feed and feel like what you write is speaking to them. You relate to us in such an incredible way. And Jack, you've also been very generous and open in your many, many years of offering your wisdom and teachings in some of your own humbling moments in relationship and the role that practice did or did not have in preparing us. I might take the liberty of reading. I didn't know if I was going to do this, but I'm going to read a couple sentences from Jack's A Path with Heart. And then I'd love to just take a few minutes and hear you both reflect on relationships and how they're impacted by the Dharma. So Jack, you've just come back from your journeys abroad, and you're a monk, and you write, "But alas, when I returned to the United States as a monk, all of it kind of fell apart. I disrobed, I enrolled in graduate school, got a job driving a taxi, and worked nights at a mental hospital in Boston. I also became involved in an intimate relationship. Although I had arrived back from the monastery clear, spacious, and high, in short order I discovered through my relationship, in the communal household where I lived, and in my graduate work, that my meditation had helped me very little with my human relationships. I was still emotionally immature, acting out the same painful patterns of blame and fear, acceptance and rejection that I had before my Buddhist training. Only the horror now was that I was beginning to see these patterns more clearly." Thank you for being honest with us. That's beautiful. So they're not unrelated, right? I mean, having a deep practice and working on your own healing inevitably prepares us for the intimacy that can bring more of the same. But what have you, I'll start with you, Jack, what have you learned since you wrote this decades ago? And how does your practice help? I know you have a lot of special relationships.
I will
in
say
your
a
life.
few things. First of all, I'm in a really wonderful, loving relationship with Trudy Goodman, my beloved, my wife, my partner, for the last decade or 12 years. It's fabulous, as you are with Soren.
Thank you, Jack.
And it's really gorgeous to watch. And I'm not sure I'm allowed to say it, but it's really fun to see that.
Well, we did.
Great. Yeah.
Now you're out of the closet, right? And they're wonderful together. So we're all supporting good relationships. One of the things that's important to understand, it does, as Diego points out, it really helps to have time where you quiet the mind and tend the heart and listen. And our relationships mirror what we learned in relationships in our families. And mine was a pretty painful family, and so we don't know how to do it. And then you think that if you get good at one area, it will carry over in another. But it doesn't work that way. Awareness doesn't automatically carry. So there's people that go to the Dalai Lama, and I love him. He's like the finest human being there is. And they'll ask him questions about marriage or giving birth to a child. It's like, the Dalai Lama has never been married. He never had a kid. You know, you're asking the wrong person. So it turns out that we have to actually direct the same mindful, loving awareness that we give to our breath, our body in meditation, or our own mind. Then we have to turn it and deliberately listen to each other and say the skills of loving awareness and attention and, or self-compassion, now I have to bring to that person that I'm with. I have to listen in the same respectful, non-judgmental way. I have to accept them just as I have to accept these things in myself. Of course I can change, but when I've done weddings for people, one of the things that, and I used to do them, I would do during the ceremony is I would say, when you go to a used car lot to buy a car, there's a sign in the window in many of these cars that will say, "as is." And I say, you may have all these fantasies about this relationship to come, but I want you to really look at each other. Are you willing to marry this person as is and love them as is? And what I've learned is meditation, therapy, good friends, community, making mistakes and then trying to sort them out, communication. Relationship takes all of the above, as you know. But it also is the place that we learn to love.
Yeah.
And what else is more important?
Yeah.
I mean, it was my wife and I, we had been together for about 6 years before we started meditating. And during those 6 years, it was clear that we had a very deep connection. There were a few times where we almost broke up, but our connection was so strong that it kept pulling us back in. But that whole first part of our relationship, it was like living in a hurricane. It was quite chaotic. There was, if you were to add together how much emotional maturity the two of us had, you would get a total of 0. And it was quite difficult. But when we started meditating, ever so slowly, there were tiny amounts of harmony that started entering into our lives. And I think particularly understanding selflessness, understanding that yes, right, we're here, we're individuals, we're having a conversation, but ultimately, what's really here? It's just ever-changing phenomenon. It's just mind and matter moving at incredibly rapid speeds. It helps you let go of some of that ego, specifically for those moments when arguments happen, right? Because that first half of our relationship, we would argue and each of us would try to win. We would try to win the argument. And like Jack says, nobody wins in a war, right? So we'd both immediately lose. But now we try to do our best to just understand, conflict is arising, anger may be arising, something, this feeling of being upset is there, but let me just take a step back and still try to appreciate your perspective. And in both of us trying to appreciate each other's perspective, we actually learn that if I appreciate her perspective, it actually doesn't negate my own. We're just understanding each other in this moment. And in that ability to understand each other, we can actually find a new middle path where we can then move forward and try to act in better ways. But I really am profoundly grateful to the Dharma because I think my connection with my wife would have never matured if it weren't for me personally building my awareness of myself, my own traumas, my own conditioning, the way that I would just constantly be reacting. That little bit of equanimity can make such a difference because it allows you to let some love through. I love that in the Buddha's teaching, there is this elimination of craving, which helps you eliminate all of that heavy load, all this mental conditioning. But then what's left over? There's metta, there's loving kindness, there's sympathetic joy, there's compassion, and then there's equanimity. So to be able to give your partner your best, it takes mental training. You have to sort of just teach yourself very intentionally using that practice. And like Jack said, then taking that practice into your everyday life and just trying again. And that's what we ended up doing. And now we've been together for 15 years. And, we still don't agree on everything, but it's beautiful because we take that as an opportunity to practice.
Yeah.
Let's see how we can handle this one. And we don't always get it right. We're imperfect people just like everybody else, but it has really been a true joy learning how to navigate the storms together and to be able to support each other because if you're a serious meditator, a lot of these meditations, they're purification techniques. So deep stuff is going to come up, right? A lot of us don't meditate necessarily in traditions that just aim towards bliss. No, we meditate to clean out the mind. And when you're cleaning out the mind, every day is not going to be a pretty day. Some days will be a little heavier than others. And to let each other know, we'll wake up and we'll let each other know our emotional barometer and be like, I don't feel that good today. I woke up and I feel sad, or I feel upset, or I'll feel something heavy that's passing through. And being in sort of that pretty consistent communication allows us to just step up for each other. Or if we both feel down, we'll just take it slow that day and do as best as we can, but not judge ourselves as we're moving through the storm.
Yeah.
But I think the practice has been just absolutely critical in allowing us to know ourselves and thus be able to love each other better. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing as much as you do about that too, because I think so many people feel like they need to have this complete version of themselves that's all healed and ready for a relationship, and you're so candid about how that was not your case, and you enter with this commitment to keep growing together.
It's a slow journey.
Yeah,
It's a slow journey. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. We're just about at time. We're so, I think I can speak on behalf of the room. Thank you both so much. Before we applause, Jack is going to leave us with a blessing.
I will, but I have a little question that just follows
Please.
this talk. How many of you have made idiots of yourself in intimate relations? Don't bother. So that's the first question. We're all in this learning curve together.
Yes. Amen.
You know, this is part of being human.
Yeah.
And then you can hold it in your heart and say yes. And you said something so beautiful, Diego, about what I might call the mindful pause. Because you get triggered, we all get triggered in various ways. And to just notice, triggered, to take some breaths, to pause and center yourself, which is what practice trains you to do, whatever your meditation, then you begin to listen, whether it's to that person or that partner or to the dilemmas that we carry as a whole.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy that we get to talk together as a community because we are holding a lot in this time. You know, and it's important that we gather together and listen, and maybe the most important thing, in some ways, listening to your own heart and taking time to ask, what's my highest intention, my best intention for this time and in this life with the gifts or the life I've been given in relationship to the world. So to quiet and set that intention, that becomes the compass then for how you use your time and your energy with one another. And so I close with a poem from John O'Donohue, wonderful Irish poet and master. And it's a prayer for peace. And so as I read it, you can also feel that we are part of the family in Tigray and Libya and those who are in the Darfur camps and the Rohingya and the people in Ukraine and the Russians in the tanks, all those young people, and so many others, that actually we want to hold everyone together as best we can. And I even do my loving kindness practice for the worst tyrants. And I say, may you be free from fear. May you be free from hate. May you be free from confusion. I can wish that for anybody. So here's the poem. For peace. As the fever of day calms toward twilight, may all that is strained in us come to ease. And as you hear this, you can feel it in yourself and spread it out across the vast world. We pray for all who suffered violence today. May an unexpected serenity surprise them. And for those who risk their lives each day for peace, may their hearts glimpse providence at the heart of history. We pray that those who make riches from violence and war might hear in their dreams the cries of the lost. That we might see through our fear of each other a new vision that will heal our fatal attraction to violence and aggression. That those who enjoy the privilege of peace might not forget their tormented brothers and sisters. That the wolf might lie down with the lamb. That our swords be beaten into plowshares. And no hurt or harm be done anywhere along this holy mountain. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cecily. Sorry for outing you, but not completely sorry.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
So thank you. We have 2 more minutes. One of the things we're going to talk more about it tomorrow, but we can put up a slide. There's a project that Jack and Diego and Cecily and myself and a few other of the community is a part of and is helping to create this new world. And it's called Wisdom Ventures. And there'll be another slideshow. We'll be talking to you more about it. And there's a whole team in the next slide that you can see, and you might see us. And if you point your phone at that, you can actually get information about it. So we'll tell you more about it, but I just thought it was important to talk to you a little bit about it tonight because it's kind of emergent from this community. And I think when Jack and Diego and Cecily spoke about this, it's a really important project for all of us. So we're going to talk more about it tomorrow. Annie has a few announcements.
I do.
But before we do that, thank you so much for your presence today. We create a field together. Like, this doesn't happen on its own. If all of you were looking at your laptops, like these, it would be different conversations. So the fact that you bring your hearts and your presence in here creates this field that we all get to enjoy. So if you like today, thank yourself.
Yeah, thank you. And I love the as-is mindset. I think it's gentle and kind. So let's bring that home and think about that a little bit more. Thank you, Jack, for that. Okay, guys, cocktail reception downstairs after this. Let's go have some fun, live music, cash bar, relax, release, let go down there a little bit. Birds of a feather. Dinners are tonight, so you guys know who you are and where you're going. So I think it's all online. Go have a blast, and let's hear about it tomorrow. All right, lots to talk about tomorrow. And that's it. We'll see you
9
guys
a.m. tomorrow.
a little bit before 9. Yep, for more of Laura's music. Good night, and digital audience, you guys too. Have a great night.